1980, January 12, HMCS St. Laurent, DDH-205, sank off Cape Hatteras, the closest point on the North American mainland to Bermuda. The ship took on water after encountering the tail end of a storm. HMCS St. Laurent was a St. Laurent-class destroyer that served in the Royal Canadian Navy and later the Canadian Forces from 1955 to 1974. She was the lead ship of her class, the first modern warship designed and built in Canada. St. Laurent was laid down on 24 November 1950 by Canadian Vickers at Montreal. She was launched on 30 November the following year and was commissioned into the Royal Canadian Navy on 29 October 1955 and initially carried the pennant number DDE-205 as a destroyer escort. Prime Minister Louis St. Laurent was present at her commissioning. She was reported to have cost $15 million to build. She underwent conversion to a destroyer helicopter escort, DDH, in the early 1960s and was officially reclassed with pennant DDH-205 on 4 October 1963. After commissioning, St. Laurent was sent to the United States to work up and be evaluated and then proceeded to visit the United Kingdom. While there, the ship was part of the escort for the Royal Yacht HMY Britannia on a state visit to Sweden. She was then stationed to the West Coast where she performed various diplomatic duties. Prior to undergoing her conversion to IDDH, she was test-fitted with the variable depth sonar, VDS. In 1959 the Canadian government ordered that the St. Laurent class be modernized, even though the class was relatively new. This was based on the fact that the St. Laurent class was no longer capable of fighting the new nuclear submarines entering service. This was done to extend the detection range of the ships and to eliminate any speed advantage of the nuclear submarines. St. Laurent was a member of the 2nd Canadian Escort Squadron in 1960 based out of Esquimalt, British Columbia. In February 1960, St. Laurent, with two sister ships, departed Esquimalt, British Columbia, performed a training cruise around the Pacific, making several port visits and returning in April. In March 1961, St. Laurent, Ottawa and Saguenay, deployed with the United States Navy's Carrier Division 17 off Hawaii. Prior to undergoing her DDH conversion, a variable depth sonar, VDS, system was test-fitted to the ship, which required the alteration of the stern. The ship then underwent the DDH refit in 1962, emerging on 4 October 1963. This meant extensively rebuilding the superstructure. A hangar and flight deck were added, and to make room for these the original single stack was twinned. The flight deck addition required the removal of one gun and one limber mount. The ship was then assigned to the East Coast. In 1964, with Mackenzie and Fraser, St. Laurent sailed on a training cruise to the Pacific. In 1966, Canada sent St. Laurent and Gatineau to the Bahamas to participate in their independence celebrations, the only country to send warships. In 1969, the ship tracked a Cuban-bound Soviet task force that was transiting through Canadian waters. St. Laurent experienced keel damage later in her career and was paid off early as the Canadian forces opted to not include her in the Destroyer Life Extension (DLEX) program of the 1970s. She was decommissioned from the Canadian Forces on 14 June 1974 and sat in Halifax as a source for spare parts for her sisters. Her early decommissioning is attributed to cost-cutting in the Canadian Forces at the time. The ship was sold on 27 September 1979 to Dartmouth Salvage Company for scrapping. St. Laurent was resold, and while en route to breakers in Brownsville, Texas, she took on water in the tail end of a powerful storm and foundered off Cape Hatteras on 12 January 1980.